You know what's terrifying? It's not the monster hiding under your bed. It's not the serial killer in the news. It's the idea that someone you trust, someone you see every day, someone who seems completely normal, could be capable of unimaginable violence. That's what makes the Noida double murder case so disturbing. Because this isn't a story about strangers. This is a story about a family. A successful, respectable family living in a nice neighborhood. The kind of family you'd never suspect. I'm going to tell you about a case that divided an entire nation. A case where the evidence pointed in one direction, but millions of people refused to believe it. A case that's still debated 15 years later. This is about Arushi Talwar. 14 years old. Brilliant student. Talented musician. Found dead in her bedroom with her throat slit. And her parents, both successful doctors, were accused of killing her. Did they do it? The court said yes. Much of India said no. The truth? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. Before we start, let me be clear about something. This case involves the murder of a child. It involves graphic violence. It involves accusations of sexual misconduct that were never proven. It involves a media circus that destroyed lives whether the accused were guilty or not. So if you're looking for a simple answer, if you want me to tell you definitively what happened, you're going to be disappointed. Because 15 years later, nobody knows for sure. What I can tell you is what the evidence showed. What the police did and didn't do. How the investigation was botched from the beginning. How the media turned a tragedy into entertainment. And how a case that should have been about finding justice for a murdered teenager became about everything else. This is the Noida double murder case. And I'm warning you now, by the end, you might not know what to believe either. Let's begin. May 16, 2008. Noida, India. A planned satellite city near Delhi. Modern. Prosperous. Safe. L32 Jalvayu Vihar. A nice apartment complex. Doctors, engineers, business people. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, but everyone keeps to themselves. Flat E21, first floor. Home of the Talwar family. Dr. Rajesh Talwar, dentist, successful practice. Dr. Nupur Talwar, also a dentist, works with her husband. And their daughter, Arushi. 14 years old. Class 9 student. May 16th started like any other day. Except it didn't. Nupur Talwar woke up around 6 a.m. Got ready. Went to wake her daughter for school. Arushi's bedroom door was locked from the inside. Nupur knocked. No response. She figured Arushi was sleeping deeply, the girl had stayed up late studying. Nupur didn't force it. She thought, let her sleep a bit more. She went about her morning. Made tea. Got ready for work. Around 6:30 a.m., she tried again. Knocked harder. Still no response. Now she was getting concerned. She called for the servant. Hemraj. He'd been with the family for a while. Lived in a small room on the terrace. Hemraj didn't respond either. Odd. He was usually up by now. Nupur called her husband. Rajesh came. They tried to open Arushi's door. It was definitely locked from inside. They called for Hemraj again. Where was he? Finally, they used a spare key. Opened Arushi's door. And found their daughter dead on her bed. Throat slit. Blood everywhere. A golf club lying nearby. Can you imagine? Can you imagine going to wake your child and finding that? Nupur screamed. Neighbors heard it. Rajesh called the police. The time was approximately 6:30 a.m. The police arrived. Noida police. They looked at the scene. 14-year-old girl, murdered in her bedroom. Door locked from inside. No signs of forced entry into the apartment. Where was Hemraj? They searched the house. Couldn't find him. The terrace door was locked. They couldn't access his room. The initial police theory formed quickly. Too quickly. Hemraj, the servant, must have done it. Must have killed Arushi and then fled. Simple. Case closed. They issued a lookout notice for Hemraj. Began searching for him. Meanwhile, the Talwars, destroyed by grief, tried to process what had happened. But here's where things get weird. Really weird. The next day, May 17th, someone decided to check the terrace more thoroughly. The door was locked. They broke it open. And found Hemraj's body. On the terrace. Throat slit. Partially decomposed. He'd been dead at least as long as Arushi. Maybe longer. So the police theory? Completely wrong. Hemraj didn't kill Arushi and run. Someone killed them both. Murdered a teenage girl and a 45-year-old man in the same house. And somehow got out without anyone noticing. The question was, who? And that's when the police did something that would haunt this case forever. They looked at the evidence. They looked at the crime scene. They looked at who had opportunity, means, motive. And they decided the parents did it. Dr. Rajesh Talwar and Dr. Nupur Talwar. Successful professionals. No criminal history. No history of violence. They just lost their only child in the most brutal way imaginable. And the police accused them of murder. The story was about to get much, much worse. But why would parents kill their own daughter? What evidence made police suspect them? And how did a case about finding a killer turn into a media circus that destroyed multiple lives? We'll find out. The investigation begins. Let's talk about how badly this investigation was bungled. Because understanding how the police screwed up is crucial to understanding why this case is still controversial. First mistake, the crime scene. When police arrived on May 16th, they didn't properly secure it. Neighbors came in. Family members were allowed to move around. Evidence was contaminated before it was even collected. The golf club near Arushi's body? Multiple people had touched it before it was photographed and bagged. The bloodstains? People had walked through them. The door locks? Tampered with by the family trying to get into rooms. This is crime scene investigation 101 stuff. And they failed it completely. Second mistake, missing Hemraj's body for a whole day. How do you not find a decomposing corpse on the terrace? The police claimed the door was locked and they couldn't access it. But come on. You have a murder scene, you search everywhere. You break down every locked door. You don't just assume the missing servant ran away. This mistake was catastrophic. Because for 24 hours, the entire investigation was based on the false assumption that Hemraj was the killer. Media reported it. Public believed it. The Talwars were told their daughter's murderer had escaped. Then, oops, actually, he's dead on your terrace. Our bad. Third mistake, the autopsy. Oh God, the autopsy. Arushi's post-mortem was conducted by Dr. Sunil Doher. The report noted the throat wound, carotid artery severed, death would have been quick. Blunt force trauma to the head, she'd been hit with something heavy before her throat was cut. But then the report included something else. Something that would become hugely controversial. The report suggested vaginal widening and claimed this indicated sexual activity. This detail was leaked to the media. And the media went insane with it. Headlines screamed about Arushi's character. About her having a boyfriend. About her parents discovering her in a compromising position and killing her in rage. Here's the problem: the autopsy finding was questioned by other medical experts. Many said vaginal widening in a teenage girl is not indicative of sexual activity. It's a normal anatomical variation. The hymen can be torn by many non-sexual activities, sports, using tampons, medical exams. But the damage was done. The media had its angle. And the Talwars, already destroyed by their daughter's murder, now had to deal with their child's reputation being destroyed too. Fourth mistake: tunnel vision. The police decided early, very early, that the parents did it. And once they decided that, they stopped looking at other possibilities. Why did they decide this? Multiple factors. The crime scene. No signs of forced entry. Doors were locked from inside. The killer would have needed access to the house, knowledge of the layout, keys to locks. The fact that the parents claimed to have heard nothing. The murders happened in their home. Arushi's room was next to theirs. Hemraj was on the terrace. How did they not hear screams, struggles, anything? The weapon. The golf club belonged to the Talwars. The knife used to slit throats was likely from their kitchen. The timing. Hemraj was killed on the terrace. His body was up there all night while the Talwars were in the flat below. How did they not know? So the police theory formed: the Talwars killed Arushi. Maybe they found her with Hemraj in a compromising situation. Maybe it was a rage killing. Then they killed Hemraj to eliminate a witness. Then they locked the terrace door, cleaned up, and pretended to discover the body in the morning. The problem with this theory? It required the Talwars to be both cold-blooded killers capable of murdering their daughter and sophisticated enough to stage a crime scene, while also being stupid enough to leave obvious evidence everywhere. It required them to commit murder in their own home with their daughter's body in the next room, then sleep peacefully through the night. It required them to be simultaneously criminal masterminds and complete idiots. But the police had decided. And they pushed forward. Rajesh Talwar was arrested on May 23, 2008. Less than a week after his daughter's murder. Charged with murder. He would spend 6 weeks in jail before being granted bail. 6 weeks of being India's most hated man. 6 weeks of media calling him a murderer. 6 weeks of losing everything: his daughter, his freedom, his reputation, his practice. And the investigation? It continued to be a mess. But Rajesh Talwar wasn't the only suspect. As the investigation stumbled forward, another theory emerged. One involving the servants. 3 men who worked in the building. 3 men who might have had motive and opportunity. Could they have been the real killers? Or was this just another dead end? While Rajesh Talwar sat in jail, another investigation was happening. Because not everyone in the police believed the parents did it. The Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, took over the case in June 2008. And they looked at a different angle. The servants. See, Hemraj wasn't the only domestic worker in the building. There were others. And 3 of them became suspects. Krishna, Vijay Mundal, Rajkumar. All 3 worked as servants in the Jalvayu Vihar complex. All 3 knew Hemraj. All 3 had access to the building. The CBI theory: what if these 3 were drinking with Hemraj on the terrace that night? What if Arushi woke up, heard noise, came to investigate? What if the servants panicked and killed her? Then killed Hemraj to eliminate witnesses? It sounded plausible. More plausible than parents killing their daughter, honestly. The CBI found evidence supporting this theory. Witnesses who said they'd seen the 3 servants together on May 15, the night before the murders. Hemraj's phone records showing calls to and from numbers associated with the servants. The fact that all 3 servants had disappeared after the murders. They'd fled Noida. Were in hiding. The CBI tracked them down. Brought them in for questioning. And here's where things get murky. The servants were interrogated extensively. Some say they were tortured. They allegedly confessed. Then recanted. Then gave different versions of events. According to one version, they'd been on the terrace with Hemraj. Drinking. Arushi came up. She saw them. They panicked. One of them hit her with a golf club. Then slit her throat. Then killed Hemraj because he'd witnessed it. According to another version, they'd molested Arushi in her room. She screamed. Hemraj came to help. They killed both of them. But these confessions were inconsistent. The servants claimed they were coerced. The CBI couldn't corroborate key details. There was no physical evidence definitively linking them to the murders. The golf club? No fingerprints from the servants. The knife? Never found. DNA evidence? Contaminated crime scene made it unreliable. And here's the thing about this theory. It had the same problem as the parents' theory. How did 3 drunk servants commit a double murder in a small apartment without waking anyone else? How did they get in and out without being seen? How did they know the layout well enough to move around in the dark? So in 2009, the CBI did something shocking. They filed a closure report. Basically said, we can't solve this case. The evidence is too contaminated. The crime scene was too compromised. We don't have enough to charge anyone. They didn't explicitly exonerate the Talwars. But they didn't charge them either. The closure report was submitted to court in December 2010. For the Talwars, this was something. Not justice for their daughter. Not closure. Not vindication. But at least not being charged with murder. Except the story wasn't over. Because the court rejected the CBI's closure report. Said it wasn't satisfactory. Ordered the investigation to continue. And in 2013, 5 years after the murders, the Talwars were charged. Both of them. Rajesh and Nupur. Murder. Destruction of evidence. Misleading the investigation. The trial began. And it would be a circus. The trial would last months. The evidence would be picked apart piece by piece. And in the end, the verdict would shock the nation. But was it justice? Or was it a scapegoating? The answer depends on what you believe about what happened that night. November 2013. A special CBI court in Ghaziabad. Dr. Rajesh Talwar and Dr. Nupur Talwar stand trial for murdering their daughter and their servant. The prosecution's case was circumstantial. That's important to understand. There was no eyewitness. No confession. No DNA evidence definitively proving the Talwars killed anyone. What they had was a theory. A narrative. And they built it piece by piece. The prosecution's narrative went like this. On the night of May 15, 2008, Dr. Rajesh Talwar came home late from a dinner with friends. He went to Arushi's room to check on her. And he found her with Hemraj. In a compromising position. The exact nature of this position was never proven. The prosecution implied sexual activity. The defense said even if Hemraj was in the room, it didn't mean anything inappropriate was happening. But according to the prosecution, Rajesh flew into a rage. Grabbed a golf club. Hit Arushi on the head. Then hit Hemraj. Nupur heard the commotion. Came to see what was happening. Saw her husband standing over their daughter's body. Saw Hemraj injured but alive. Together, according to the prosecution, they decided to cover it up. They couldn't explain Arushi's death without revealing what Rajesh had found. So they decided to kill Hemraj too. Make it look like an outsider had killed both of them. Rajesh slit Arushi's throat with a surgical knife. Then dragged Hemraj to the terrace. Slit his throat. Locked the terrace door. Cleaned up the crime scene as best they could. Then they went to bed. Slept through the night. Woke up in the morning and discovered their daughter's body. That was the story. Cold. Calculated. Horrific if true. The defense tore it apart. First, the compromising position was never proven. It was speculation based on a discredited autopsy report. There was zero evidence Arushi and Hemraj had any inappropriate relationship. Second, the timeline didn't work. Rajesh came home around 11 p.m. The murders happened sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. based on forensic analysis. The prosecution's theory required Rajesh to discover his daughter, kill her in rage, kill Hemraj, clean up, and go to bed, all while his wife slept in the next room. Third, the weapon. The golf club had no definitive fingerprints. The knife was never found. The prosecution claimed it was a surgical scalpel that Rajesh disposed of. But they couldn't prove it. Fourth, the noise. The murders would have been loud. Violent. Screaming. Struggling. The neighbors claimed to have heard nothing. The Talwars claimed to have heard nothing. Was everyone lying? Or did the murders happen when everyone was in deep sleep? Fifth, the servants' theory was never properly investigated. The defense argued that Krishna, Vijay, and Rajkumar were far more likely suspects. They had motive, robbery, possibly assault. They had opportunity, access to the building. They had fled after the murders. Why weren't they on trial? The prosecution's response: the crime scene. The locked doors. The lack of forced entry. An outsider couldn't have done this. But the defense showed that outsiders could have gotten in. Hemraj had a key. He could have let them in. The terrace was accessible from outside. The locks were old and could be manipulated. The trial went on for months. Witnesses testified. Experts were called. Forensic evidence was debated. And throughout all of this, the Talwars maintained their innocence. They hadn't killed their daughter. They hadn't killed Hemraj. They were victims, not perpetrators. The judge, Judge Shyam Lal, heard all the evidence. And on November 25, 2013, he delivered his verdict. Guilty. Both Rajesh and Nupur Talwar were found guilty of murder. Guilty of destruction of evidence. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. The courtroom erupted. The media went wild. India was divided. Some said, finally, justice for Arushi. Her parents were murderers and deserved to be punished. Others said, this is a travesty. Two innocent people were being scapegoated because the police couldn't solve the case. The Talwars were led away in handcuffs. Sent to prison. Their lives destroyed. But the story still wasn't over. Because the conviction was based on circumstantial evidence. On a theory that required believing the worst about two parents. And in 2017, the Talwars would appeal. And the appellate court would have to decide, was the evidence strong enough to convict? Or had a terrible miscarriage of justice occurred? Before we get to the appeal, we need to talk about the media. Because the media's role in this case was, let's call it problematic. From the moment Arushi's body was discovered, the media descended. TV cameras. Newspaper reporters. Everyone wanting the story. And the story they told was sensational. Lurid. Often irresponsible. Remember the autopsy report that suggested vaginal widening? That was leaked to media within days. And the coverage was disgusting. Headlines like, Arushi was sexually active. Teen's secret life. What parents didn't know. A 14-year-old murder victim was being character assassinated in the press. Her private life, or speculation about her private life, was being broadcast to millions. Then the theory started. TV channels ran investigative reports that were really just speculation dressed up as journalism. One theory, Arushi was having an affair with Hemraj. Her parents found out and killed them both in an honor killing. Another theory, Arushi had a boyfriend. The parents disapproved. They killed her to preserve family honor. Zero evidence for any of this. But it was broadcast as fact. The Talwars were tried and convicted in the court of public opinion long before they ever saw a courtroom. Their photos were on every channel. Their lives were dissected. Every detail of their marriage, their practice, their parenting was examined and found wanting. Reporters camped outside their home. Followed them to court. Shouted questions. Did you kill your daughter? How does it feel to be a murderer? And here's the thing, the media coverage influenced the investigation. Police felt pressure to make an arrest. So they arrested Rajesh Talwar before they had solid evidence. The media coverage influenced the trial. The judge would later say he'd been influenced by societal perception. He'd convicted based partly on how the case looked, not just the evidence. Some journalists did responsible reporting. But many didn't. Many treated a double murder like entertainment. Like a soap opera with real people's lives as the plot. There were TV shows analyzing the case. Debates with experts who'd never seen the actual evidence. Reenactments with actors playing Arushi and her parents. True crime specials that presented theory as fact. The Talwars couldn't defend themselves. They were grieving parents who'd lost their child. They didn't want to talk to media. And their silence was taken as guilt. Why aren't they crying on camera? Why don't they defend themselves? Innocent people would be screaming their innocence. As if there's a right way to grieve. As if devastated parents should perform their trauma for cameras. The media also pushed the honor-killing narrative hard. And this is important to understand in the Indian context. Honor killings do happen in India. Families, usually in rural, conservative areas, sometimes kill daughters who violate cultural norms. Dating outside caste or religion. Choosing their own partners. Being too modern. So when the media suggested this was an honor killing, it played into existing prejudices. It made the case fit a familiar narrative. The problem? The Talwars didn't fit the profile. They were urban, educated, liberal. Nupur had said in interviews that she wouldn't mind if Arushi had a boyfriend when she was older. They weren't conservative parents who'd kill to preserve honor. But nuance doesn't sell newspapers. Successful doctors commit honor killing is a better headline than unsolved double murder with contaminated evidence. The media circus had real consequences. It made it harder for the Talwars to get a fair trial. It traumatized their extended family. It turned their daughter's murder into entertainment. And it influenced public opinion so thoroughly that even when the Talwars were acquitted on appeal, many people refused to believe they were innocent. Because the media had told them otherwise. For years. Speaking of the appeal, let's talk about what happened in 2017 when the case went to the Allahabad High Court. Because that verdict would be very different. Before we continue, I need you to think about something. This case, this tragedy, what does it teach you? Because this isn't just about one murder. It's about how investigations can be bungled. How media can destroy lives. How prejudice and assumptions can override evidence. So I want to hear from you. In the comments, tell me. What are you learning from the Noida case? About how investigations should and shouldn't be conducted? About the media's responsibility when covering crime? About the danger of assuming guilt before trial? And here's the harder question. if you were on a jury, how would you decide? The evidence is circumstantial. The parents look suspicious. But there's reasonable doubt. How much doubt is reasonable? When do you convict? Share your thoughts. Because understanding this case means understanding these bigger issues. And if you're finding this case as fascinating and disturbing as I am, hit that subscribe button. Because we're only halfway through this story, and it gets even more complicated. Now, let's talk about the appeal. October 12, 2017. The Allahabad High Court. 9 years after Arushi's murder. 4 years after the Talwars were convicted. Justice B.K. Narayana and Justice A.K. Mishra were hearing the appeal. The question before them: did the trial court have enough evidence to convict the Talwars beyond reasonable doubt? The appeal focused on several key points. Point 1. The crime scene. The defense argued that the crime scene investigation was so badly botched that no reliable conclusions could be drawn from it. Evidence was contaminated. Chain of custody was broken. Photos were taken after the scene had been tampered with. You can't base a murder conviction on compromised evidence. That's fundamental to justice. Point 2. The murder weapon. The prosecution never found the knife used to slit throats. They theorized it was a surgical scalpel that Rajesh disposed of. But they never proved this. The golf club had no clear fingerprints linking it to the Talwars. Convicting someone of murder when you haven't found the murder weapon? That requires very strong circumstantial evidence. Did they have it? Point 3. Motive. The prosecution's motive, that Rajesh found Arushi with hemorrhage and killed them in rage, was based entirely on speculation. There was zero evidence of any inappropriate relationship between Arushi and hemorrhage. The autopsy's sexual activity claim had been debunked. So what was the motive? Why would successful doctors with no history of violence suddenly commit a brutal double murder? Point 4. Alternative suspects. The servants, Krishna, Vijay Mundal, Rajkumar, were never properly investigated. They had fled after the murders. They had given inconsistent statements. But the trial court had dismissed them as suspects without adequate analysis. The defense argued, if there are other plausible suspects, you can't convict our clients beyond reasonable doubt. Point 5. Circumstantial evidence standard. This is crucial. In Indian law, you can convict on circumstantial evidence alone. But the circumstances must be so strong that they exclude every other reasonable hypothesis except guilt. Did the evidence against the Talwars meet that standard? Or were there other reasonable explanations for the facts? The appellate judges examined the trial court's verdict carefully. And they found problems. Judge Shamlal's original verdict had relied heavily on assumptions. Assumption: the locked doors meant only the parents could have committed the murders. But the defense showed the locks could be manipulated. Hemraj had keys. The terrace was accessible from outside. Assumption: the Talwars' behavior after discovering the body was suspicious. But people in shock don't behave rationally. There's no correct way to react to finding your child murdered. Assumption: the parents must have heard something if murders happened in their home. But the flat was air-conditioned. Doors were closed. People sleep deeply. It's possible they heard nothing. The appellate court's conclusion: the trial court had filled gaps in evidence with assumptions. Had assumed guilt rather than requiring the prosecution to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. On October 12, 2017, the Allahabad High Court acquitted Dr. Rajesh Talwar and Dr. Nupur Talwar. They were innocent. Free to go. After 4 years in prison. The verdict was detailed. Over 200 pages. It methodically tore apart the prosecution's case. The prosecution has been able to prove some circumstances against the accused. But there are certain other circumstances that may point to some other person as the possible accused. It is a matter of common sense that the prosecution cannot base its case on weak and strong circumstances and lead evidence to that effect and expect the court to absolve the prosecution from the duty to prove its case beyond reasonable doubt. Translation: you can't convict on maybes. You can't convict on assumptions. You need proof beyond reasonable doubt. And the prosecution didn't have it. The Talwars walked out of court. 4 years of their lives gone. Their daughter still dead. Her real killer, or killers, still unknown. They were free. But were they vindicated? That depends on who you ask. Because the acquittal didn't prove they were innocent. It proved there wasn't enough evidence to convict them. Those are different things. Some people celebrated the acquittal. Said justice had finally been done. An innocent couple had been freed. Others were furious. Said dangerous murderers had been let off on a technicality. That the Talwars had gotten away with murder. The truth? We still don't know. And that's what makes this case so haunting. So if the Talwars didn't do it, who did? Let's examine the evidence and theories one more time. Because somewhere in this mess is the truth about what really happened on May 15, 2008. Let's be honest. Let's look at this objectively. What does the evidence actually suggest? Theory 1, the Talwars did it. Here's the case for their guilt. The crime scene, no forced entry. Doors locked from inside. Arushi's door locked from inside her room. The terrace door locked from inside. Whoever did this had access, had keys, knew the layout. Who fits that description? The parents. The timing: the murders happened while the Talwars were home. In a small apartment. Arushi's room was next to her parents' room. How did they not hear anything? Either they heard nothing because they're very deep sleepers in an air-conditioned, insulated flat. Or they heard nothing because they were the ones doing it. The behavior: the morning after. Nupur found her daughter dead and her first instinct was to, what? Call for Hemraj? Why? If you find your child murdered, you call police immediately. You scream. You panic. The defense said she was in shock. But it does seem odd. The weapon, the golf club, was theirs. The knife was likely from their kitchen. Even if you argue an outsider could have used their implements, it's still suspicious. The cleanup: the crime scene showed signs of cleanup. Selective cleaning: some blood wiped away, some left. Why would an outsider clean up? They'd flee. But a family member might try to stage the scene. Make it look different than it was. The Hemraj factor: Hemraj's body wasn't found immediately. It was on the terrace all day while the Talwars were home. How did they not know? How did they not smell decomposition? How did they not check the terrace when he was missing? Unless they knew exactly where he was. Because they'd put him there. The motive: okay, the prosecution's honor-killing theory was weak. But there could be other motives we don't know about. Maybe there was an argument that escalated. Maybe Hemraj had seen something, knew something, and had to be silenced. Maybe it wasn't premeditated but a rage killing followed by panic and cover-up. The lying: the Talwars' statements to police had inconsistencies. Small ones, but they were there. About timing, about what they did that morning, about who was where when. Innocent people can have inconsistent memories, especially under trauma. But lying about details suggests consciousness of guilt. If you believe all of this, if you weight it heavily, the parents look guilty. 2 doctors, smart enough to nearly pull off the perfect murder. Nearly. But there's another theory. One that explains all the same evidence without requiring parents to murder their child. And it's equally plausible. Theory 2, Krishna, Vijay Mundal, and Rajkumar did it. Here's how this theory works. The setup, May 15, 2008. Evening. Hemraj is on the terrace. He's off duty. He invites his friends, the 3 servants who work in the complex, to join him. They drink. They hang out. This wasn't unusual. Servants in the complex knew each other. They'd drink together sometimes on their off hours. The crime, sometime after midnight, one of them decides to rob the Talwar flat. Or maybe they just want to mess around. They're drunk, inhibitions lowered. Hemraj has keys. Or knows how to get in. They enter the apartment. Quietly. The Talwars are asleep. They go to Arushi's room. Why? Maybe they think there's money or jewelry there. Maybe one of them had noticed Arushi before, had inappropriate thoughts. Maybe it's random. Arushi wakes up. Sees strangers in her room. Starts to scream. One of them panics. Grabs the golf club leaning against the wall. Hits her. Hits her hard to stop her screaming. Then realizes what he's done. Hemraj comes into the room. He's heard the noise. He sees what's happened. He's panicking too. The servants realize, Hemraj can identify them. He knows them. He'll talk. They can't leave him alive. They drag him to the terrace. They have to kill him too. One of them, or maybe all of them in a frenzy, cuts both victims' throats with a kitchen knife to make sure they're dead. Then they flee. Run. Leave Noida. Go into hiding. The evidence. The locked doors, the servants had access to keys. Hemraj could have let them in. Or they could have locked doors behind them as they left to delay discovery. The noise. If the Talwars were in deep sleep in an air-conditioned bedroom with doors closed, they might not have heard a quick attack. Arushi could have been unconscious from the head blow before she could scream much. The cleanup, there wasn't much cleanup. The scene was bloody. An outsider wouldn't stick around to clean. They'd just run. Which is what the scene looks like. The flight, all 3 servants fled after the murders. Disappeared. That's consciousness of guilt right there. The motive. Robbery gone wrong. Or sexual assault attempted and interrupted. Both are sadly common motives. The phone records, the CBI found evidence these 3 were in contact with Hemraj before the murders. The confessions, yes, they recanted. Yes, they claimed coercion. But they did confess. And confessions, even unreliable ones, suggest something. If you believe this theory, the Talwars are innocent. Tragic victims. They lost their daughter and then were falsely accused because the police couldn't solve the case. The Rayal killers walked free because the investigation was bungled from day one. But there are problems with this theory too. Problems that make you question everything. Because if the servants did it, why wasn't there more forensic evidence? Why were their confessions so inconsistent? And why would they risk murder when they could have just run after the first attack? Here's what keeps me up at night about this case. The questions that have no good answers. Question 1, the golf club. Forensic analysis of the golf club was inconclusive. There were blood traces, but contamination made it unclear whose blood. There were no clear fingerprints. If the parents did it, why would Rajesh use his own golf club and leave it at the scene? If the servants did it, how did they know to grab that specific club in the dark? How did they know where it was? Question 2. The knife. Never found. The prosecution theorized it was a surgical scalpel that Rajesh disposed of. But they never proved this. They never found it. If the parents did it, where is the knife? They had time to dispose of it, sure. But where? It's never been found. If the servants did it, did they take it with them? Why take the knife but leave the club? Question 3. The terrace door. It was locked from inside. The key was found inside the flat. If the parents did it, this makes sense. They dragged Hemraj's body to the terrace, locked the door, kept the key inside. If the servants did it, how did they lock the door from inside and then leave? Did Hemraj lock it before he was killed? Why would he do that? Question 4. The noise. This is the big one. The Talwar's bedroom was next to Arushi's. The walls weren't that thick. Even with AC on, even in deep sleep, how did they hear nothing? If the parents did it, obviously they heard it because they were doing it. If the servants did it, this is harder to explain. But possible. People in deep sleep can miss a lot. And if the attack was quick, head blow rendering Arushi unconscious before she could scream much, maybe it was quiet enough. Question 5. The morning after. Nupur's behavior that morning. First she knocked on Arushi's door. No answer. She didn't break it down immediately. She called for Hemraj. Went about her morning. Then tried again. If the parents did it, this was staging. Trying to appear normal. If they're innocent, this is a mother assuming her teenage daughter is sleeping in. Not immediately jumping to, my child has been murdered. Which is, normal. Who thinks that? Question 6. The Hemraj discovery. The police didn't find Hemraj's body for 24 hours. It was on the terrace. The door was locked. But come on, you have a murder scene, you search everywhere. How did the Talwars not insist on checking the terrace when Hemraj was missing? How did they not think to look there? If they did it, because they knew he was dead up there and were hoping the body wouldn't be found quickly. If they're innocent, because they were traumatized, in shock, and not thinking clearly. They assumed Hemraj had run away, which is what police initially told them. Question 7. The forensics. The forensic evidence was compromised. Contaminated. Unreliable. This is agreed upon by everyone. But whose fault is that? The police for bungling the crime scene. That much is clear. But did the Talwars contribute to contamination? By moving around the flat that morning? By touching things before police arrived? Or were they just in shock, doing what any parent would do when finding their child's body? Question 8. The CBI flip. The CBI initially investigated the servants. Found enough to consider them suspects. Then filed a closure report saying they couldn't solve the case. Then the court rejected the closure report. Ordered them to continue. And suddenly the CBI charged the Talwars. What changed? Did they find new evidence? Or did they feel pressure to charge someone, anyone? Question 9. The motive. If the Talwars did it, what was the actual motive? Not the sensationalized, honor-killing theory. What would make two successful, educated people murder their only child? The prosecution never adequately answered this. And motive matters. If the servants did it. Robbery or assault. Those are clear motives. But why kill Hemraj, their friend? Why not just run after killing Arushi? Question 10. The certainty. Here's my biggest question. How can anyone be certain about what happened? The evidence is contaminated. The investigation was bungled. There were multiple possible suspects. The case was tried in the media before it got to court. How can anyone, prosecution, defense, judges, public, be absolutely certain of guilt or innocence? And yet people are certain. Completely certain. On both sides. Some people are convinced the Talwars are murderers who got away with it. Others are convinced they're innocent victims of a miscarriage of justice. How can we be so certain about something so uncertain? That's what haunts me about this case. But let's try to be objective. Let's look at what we can actually prove versus what we're assuming. Because the difference between those two things is everything. It's 2024. 16 years after Arushi's murder. Let me tell you where everyone is now. The Talwars, free, but their lives are destroyed. Rajesh and Nupur were released from prison in 2017 after their acquittal. They've tried to rebuild. Their dental practice is gone. Their reputation is in tatters. Some people still believe they murdered their daughter. They live quietly now. Avoiding media. Avoiding public attention. They gave a few interviews after release saying they just want to be left alone. They've lost everything, their daughter, their careers, years of their lives, their place in society. Are they innocent? The courts say the prosecution didn't prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. That's not the same as proving innocence. But in the eyes of the law, they're free people. The servants, Krishna, Vijay Mundal, and Rajkumar have disappeared from public view. After their interrogation and release, they vanished. No one knows where they are. No one's looking for them anymore. If they did it, they got away with murder. If they didn't, they're living with the trauma of being accused. The investigation, officially closed but technically unsolved. The CBI considers the case concluded with the Talwars' acquittal. But they never identified an alternative suspect. Never charged anyone else. Arushi's murder remains in the unsolved column. Hemraj's too. The media moved on to the next sensational case. The journalists who covered this case, some did good work, some did terrible work. None of them faced consequences for the irresponsible coverage. The public, still divided. If you search for this case online, you'll find people absolutely convinced the Talwars are guilty. And people absolutely convinced they're innocent. The certainty on both sides is remarkable given how uncertain the evidence is. Arushi, forever 14. Her life cut short by violence. Her death became a spectacle. Her memory is forever tied to this controversy. That's the real tragedy. A bright, talented young girl was murdered. And instead of the focus being on her life, on justice for her, it became about media narratives and legal proceedings and public opinion. Somewhere, her killer or killers walk free. Live their lives. Maybe feel guilt. Maybe don't. We'll probably never know. So what's my conclusion? I don't know who killed Arushi Talwar and Hemraj Banjade. I genuinely don't know. I can see the case against the parents. I can also see how they might be innocent. I can see the case against the servants. I can also see how it might be someone else entirely. What I do know is this: the investigation was bungled. The media was irresponsible. The trial was influenced by factors beyond evidence. And the truth, whatever it is, remains unknown. If you believe the Talwars are guilty, I understand why. The circumstances look bad. Their behavior seems suspicious. The locked doors, the proximity, the weapon, it all points to them. If you believe they're innocent, I understand that too. The evidence is circumstantial. There are alternative suspects. The prosecution never proved motive. The crime scene was contaminated. Both positions are defensible. Both have logic behind them. That's what makes this case so controversial. But here's what I think we can all agree on. A 14-year-old girl was murdered. That murder remains unsolved. Her family, whether they're victims or perpetrators, has been destroyed. And the Indian justice system failed. Failed to solve the case. Failed to provide certainty. Failed to deliver justice. Arushi Talwar deserved better. She deserved an investigation that wasn't bungled. Media coverage that wasn't sensationalized. A justice system that found the truth instead of finding a convenient narrative. She deserved to grow up. To become the person she was meant to be. To live her life. Instead, she's a name on a case file. A subject of true crime videos. A source of endless debate about what might have happened. And that breaks my heart. Before I close out, if this case affected you the way it affected me, if you're sitting there with more questions than answers, feeling frustrated by the lack of resolution, thinking about how justice can fail, then do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. Because I cover cases like this. Cases where the truth is elusive. Where the evidence is complex. Where easy answers don't exist. Like this video if you think this case deserves to be remembered. If you think Arushi deserves to be more than a footnote in true crime history. And comment below. Tell me what you think. Who do you believe killed Arushi? Or do you, like me, find yourself unable to say for certain? Your engagement helps these videos reach more people. Helps these cases stay in public consciousness. Helps ensure that even unsolved cases aren't forgotten. This is the Noida double murder case. A tragedy compounded by failures. A mystery that may never be solved. A reminder that justice is fragile and truth is elusive. Arushi Talwar. Hemraj Banjade. Say their names. Remember them. Not as a case. Not as a controversy. As people. As victims who deserved better. Thank you for listening. And remember, the truth matters. Even when we can't find it. Especially when we can't find it. Stay safe. Stay skeptical. And never stop asking questions.